want to stay with this story. Last week, we spoke with one of the reporters from ProPublica who has exposed the corrupt bond between Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, and the billionaire Harlan Crow. There was a super yacht, potentially illegal trips aboard a private jet. ProPublica has since reported that the conservative mega donor, Harlan Crow, bought a house from Clarence Thomas and seems to have overpaid for it. This was not disclosed. And now the Washington Post has entered the fray, reporting that Thomas has disclosed income from a real estate firm that hasn't existed for 17 years. So it's follow the money stuff. It seems like a big deal to me, but Dahlia Lithwick is far more informed on this and other matters than I am. She's a longtime legal correspondent for Slate. She's the host of the podcast Amicus. Thank you, Dahlia, for joining us. Tell me what you make of the recent reporting around the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
Hey, Dan, thank you for having me. I mean, it's so weird because this is a beat in which, other than law changing, nothing happens. You know, the justices generally kind of behave themselves and we generally leave them alone. And this burst of stories you're talking about, whether it's the ProPublica revelations about these $500,000 trips that Justice Thomas was taking every year for decades and not disclosing, or the new stuff from last week about the fact that I guess Harlan Crow, this GOP mega donor, is Clarence Thomas's mom's landlord. She currently lives in a house that they bought for her. And now this new stuff about this defunct company. It's all so gross. And I think it sort of, to your question, it raises two things. One is, you know, there's very, very weak ethics laws at the court. The Supreme Court are the only 9 justices that don't actually have a code of ethics that's binding on them or enforceable on them. But the other thing is, it's not super clear anything's going to happen despite all of this big deal stuff, because we don't actually have a mechanism to really do anything.
Did Clarence Thomas break the law?
In my view, and we did a piece on this, while the law is murky on some of the trips and the mega yacht and the vacations, it's not murky on the flights. The airplane travel he had to disclose, even though they've changed the law. They've closed that loophole in the last week. So yes, he broke the law on the flights, like using Harlan Crow's jet to fly around to his own individual events, I think is not a close call. And then on the disclosure laws, he had to disclose this transaction with Harlan Crow about the real estate where his mom lives. I don't think there's any ethics expert in the country who says he didn't break the law. For what it's worth, we have reporting, brand new reporting from CNN saying he's going to now amend his filings to fix it.
Dahlia, is there any precedent for this at the Supreme Court level?
You know, there is. The last time we had stuff like this was Abe Fortas in the 1960s, and his dealings with sort of rich donors were to the tune of much, much, much less money. He was forced off the court. I mean, they made him resign. And not only did LBJ kind of give up on him, but the Chief Justice, Earl Warren, who was also a pretty liberal guy, gave up on him, and the other justices gave up on him, and Fortas resigned. So there is precedent for this. I think what there isn't precedent for is this super polarized conversation where the people who want to defend Clarence Thomas, instead of saying he didn't break the law, are just saying, but he's awesome.
Dishonest Abe, huh?
He's a good guy, which he is. He's a great guy. But the fact is, he seems to have broken the law.
Why is this allowed to happen?
Well, a couple of things. One, as I said, there's no ethics rules at the court. The 9 justices are adorable. They say, yes, there's a code of ethics. Yes, it applies to every other federal judge in the country, but it would be too onerous for us to police ourselves. So the word they use, Dan, which I love, is they consult the ethics rules the way you'd consult a menu, and which is awesome. I'm glad they consult it, but that doesn't make it enforceable. I think the other problem is just this huge problem, this existential problem that the court has just been left to police itself forever and ever. And there's really, other than impeachment, there's nothing to be done about misconduct at the court. And so we tend to hear these stories and shrug our shoulders and say, but they're magic, so what can we do? We'll just have to live with it.
Dahlia, thank you so much for explaining this in terms that are easy to understand. There's a sign behind you that says Indian food. What's the story with that?
My teenage son found it on a street corner in Brooklyn and loved it. And so there it is. I'm not responsible for my children's weird grifting taste.
Dahlia, but it sounds like he stole a sign. I mean,
Yeah, ethics violation.
yeah.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that's a $500,000 Harlan Crow sign behind
No,
me?
there are
Is that
different
what you're-
degrees of theft.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That sign wasn't yours, and now it's yours, and
Stole
it's
a
right.
sign,
It's
though.
right behind you.
Yeah. Maybe I will send it to Clarence Thomas's mom's house and they can put it up in her house. Maybe that'll make the world fair. You're right. I am now disclosing that my son stole a sign in Brooklyn.
By the way, if you had to come up with the name of an evil billionaire, Harlan Crow.
It's pretty
Boy,
good.
that's right
Pretty
up there,
good,
right?
yeah.
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's a strong name. Of the reporting that you've seen, Dahlia, what would you say is, I want to say damaging, but I'm not sure any of this ultimately ends up being damaging unless he chooses to resign. And given that there is no shame here and the self-policing doesn't work, I doubt very much that he's going to do that. So from the reporting, what do you look at and find most appalling?
I think that the court is in trouble, right? We're seeing a Supreme Court that relies only on public approval. The court has, the Federalist Papers say neither the purse nor the sword. For our purposes, they don't have an army, they don't have a budget. If Congress wanted to shut all the toilets down and turn off the lights, Congress could do that tomorrow. The only power the court has is public approval. And in the last couple of years, we've seen those numbers tank. They're the lowest they've ever been in the history of polling. And so for me, almost the most worrisome stuff beyond the law breaking we talked about earlier is that nobody seems to care. It's that the court is watching its numbers tank and tank and tank. And instead of saying, like, maybe we should conduct ourselves like normal jurists who have not enough rules, they blame the press. They blame the guys at ProPublica who reported that. Heck out of this story should deserve like plaudits for it. And instead they just say it's a smear. And so I think for me, it's that if you believe in the rule of law and constitutional democracy, you can't have a court that people think is garbage. And for the court not to protect centuries of kind of accumulated respect and to say, yeah, we'll be garbage, that almost is the scariest thing because that feels kind of existential to me.
You say people don't care, but I do believe we've arrived where Americans and American women and the allies of American women do very much care that rights are being taken away by people, by men who are corrupt.
So this is, I think, the most essential point. If all this were going on by itself, it would be insane, right? This would be, like I said, nothing since Abe Fortas in the 60s. But you're right. This is going on under the shadow of the decision to overturn Roe a year ago, the decision to really end gun regulations a year ago, the decision to kind of hobble the EPA as it's trying to sort carbon emissions, doing away with affirmative action in higher education this term. Like, it's crazy what the court is doing right now, separate and apart from Clarence Thomas's extracurriculars. And I think, as you're implying, we're also looking at the court has just been thrust into a decision to possibly take away the FDA's ability to use medication abortion as a drug across the country because one judge in Texas doesn't like it. And the court just stepped into that on Friday. And so you're exactly right. A court that has operated under the radar, no drama, trying to kind of keep itself from being A1 news is suddenly A1 news in a million ways. And you're also right that if you look at the response to that Dobbs decision that overturned Roe last year, women particularly are organized. They're marching. 6 states that put abortion on the ballot this year in a referendum all protected abortion rights. So women are like furious. And the justices are, as you say, continuing to act as though nothing to see here, move on, we'll just wait this out.
Is the Supreme Court, are you willing to say as an expert, is the Supreme Court now corrupt, or is just Clarence Thomas clearly corrupt?
I think that when the Supreme Court started doing what it did last year, Dan, which is taking cases that were not properly before it, there was no reason for them to hear that abortion case, no real reason to hear the gun case, no real reason to hear affirmative action again, and then deciding these issues by saying we don't care what precedent says, we're making up laws, we go along now. I think that was the tipping point. I think the Clarence Thomas stuff in some sense, it's super bad. And I think it's easy for us to get our heads on it. Like, who among us doesn't want to travel on a super yacht? But I think it's reflective of the corruption in the institution that is much bigger than Clarence Thomas. It's an institution that does not seem to have a braking mechanism right now. And as we've been saying, it also seems totally unconcerned that the public finds it horrifying.
Major outlets are now getting involved with the reporting on this. So where does this go from here? Is it just a lot of noise, or is something going to happen?
I mean, that is the question. I think that, if I'm right that we've largely been in this weird hostage situation for like decades. They put all these Watergate reforms in, and the court was supposed to conduct itself, disclosing things and being careful to steer clear of impropriety. And now we're seeing that those laws don't work. And so you're quite right. I think that sense that we're just going to kind of suck it up and not fuss about it is really, really like cratered in the last couple of weeks. You're seeing people like Sheldon Whitehouse, like Senator Whitehouse, like Representative Hank Johnson. People across the spectrum are asking for meaningful, not just putting in place ethics rules. That's one thing it's missing, but like investigation into Clarence Thomas, asking the Attorney General to investigate him. I haven't seen energy around serious court misconduct like this, certainly in my career. So I think it could become a thing, but it entirely depends on whether the American public wants it to be a thing, or if a week from now we've just moved along, nothing to see here.
Best guess what happens with Clarence Thomas. Can you even do it without answering the question you just answered, which is the American public going to continue to pay attention to this?
I think the best indication we have that Clarence Thomas knows he's in trouble is that last week, after that first story about the yachts and the travel broke, he issued a statement explaining it. Doesn't usually do that. This weekend, he issued a statement saying he's going to fix his disclosure documents again to account for the sale of his mom's house. I think the fact that he's nervous and he's explaining. Remember, Ronald Reagan said, if you're explaining, you're losing. Like, he's explaining. He knows he's on the ropes. And so my best guess is this doesn't just go away. Whether it goes away because the court very quickly says, okay, now we're going to have some ethics rules and enforce them, or if it goes away because there's a real investigation and people are mad and then we see an impeachment. That I'm not sure about. Again, I think it turns on how the court chooses to surf this thing, much more so than anything else.
Dahlia, thank you for the expertise, the illumination. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Sorry about the sign, y'all.
Well, tell your son to get his act together.
Thief.
I mean, seriously.
Thief.
Yeah.
He's a
I'm
very
going to
good
tell him
thief.
to steal a super yacht next time.
There it is. That's how you do it.